Okay.
All right. Naike Swai, so good to have you here.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk because I think we met because we both have a love of Chinese medicine. We're both acupuncturists and
Mhm.
yeah, have a love of the old medicine, all that good ancient stuff. Um,
Mhm.
but you are so much more than a practitioner. Uh, I saw your what was it? You did a sound bath yesterday. You're a talented
Yes.
musician. It was so amazing.
Yay. You tuned in?
I tuned in. I did. It was so worth it.
Cool.
And you're also a talented astrologer. And I know this because I've had readings from you and I've also attended a few of your classes. So I feel like you're such an amazing combination of different talents, and the whole like being a healer and being an astrologer gives you such a unique perspective. So it's so exciting to sit down and talk with you about all of that good stuff.
Yeah. Yay. This is
um,
great. I didn't realize I was coming to a big me up session.
totally. Well, you have an app out actually called Cosmic Life that you're working on launching, from what I understand.
Yeah, it's still in beta form, so it's not out to the public yet.
That's
Yeah,
exciting.
and no, it's very exciting. Yeah, I've been working intensively on that as part of a local business accelerator, tech accelerator program called PI, Portland Incubation Experiment. And so making a lot of strides, learning a lot about tech, and also
Awesome.
understanding how to shift and navigate how the project needs to move forward at this point. Yeah.
Awesome. And it's it's a relationship app, but not just dating, right? It's making connections between people kind of based on their charts and based on the stars.
Yeah. So at its the edit the idea of it is to connect people, is to expand our language and our language tools, that as they and how in the realm of relationships, so how we define, how we speak about relationships, to um astrology actually offers us a really incredible language to understand um our to understand our personal drives, our personal motives, our personal perspectives, where we come from, and other people's. And so what when I first started sort of realizing the potential for what how astrology can speak to the intricacies and the dynamics in within relationships, I became really interested in having more people join the conversation, because I thought I found it to be a really valuable tool. And so what the app does, or what the app strives to do, is to make that language, to introduce us to that language, and to make it fun, accessible, and useful. And one of the ways to, do that at first is to be playful with it, which is so in its beginning iterations, Cosmic Life is a dating app,
Gotcha.
but can evolve into much more than that.
That sounds super exciting. Is it, and it's specifically for folks of color and uh, kind of queer folks of color, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Awesome. And what kind of what brought you to that choice with the app to really focus on that community?
Um, well, that's who I am. So, um, well, it's, I think we don't have enough spaces that are defined by us, where every
Hmm.
aspect of the space is defined by our evolving desires, is just saturated with our conversations, our imagery, our personal mythology, and the creation of our mythology, and the creation of, or the imagining of ourselves forward, and
Mm,
of ourselves within relationship, of ourselves on planet Earth, influenced by the stars. And so, in creating a space that is just for queer POC, we really wanted to have an incubational space where we can define ourselves freely, and just by our own standards, so not having to like accommodate all these other views and all these other paths, but where we can really just have the space to like work with our own community.
Oof.
And there isn't
Yeah.
really a space like that out there, and when it comes to the intersection of like astrology, dating, relationships, and Afrofuturism. And so yeah, that's so we were like, we want to create that and
Yes.
see what could happen.
Ooh, yeah. Gives me tingles. So exciting. What got you into astrology? Where did you enter into astrology as an interest, as a passion?
um I remember this very distinctly. I was in college. I was studying cultural anthropology, and I was taking all the random classes that you take when you're a Cullanth major, which seemingly have no importance to anything you're going to do in the future. So I was in a class that was called Medieval Magic,
Ooh,
and where I was learning about Paracelsus and the magical arts movement in the Middle Ages in Europe, and that was really the main focus of the class. And all the back in the Middle Ages in Europe, there was a lot of discussions that went on about what constituted a physician. So somebody
mm,
who offers both physical, spiritual counsel, but also physical treatment to a person. So back then, anybody who was a physician like us today would actually have to be trained in astrology, in herbs, and in certain like very intuitive also practices.
wow.
So yeah, it's really interesting. So I mean, these are like, we're yeah, it's not the first time we're having these conversations. But yeah, anyway, at that time, astrology, our teacher started, telling us about astrology and the importance that astrology had in the development of the early sciences, actually, not just like medical sciences, but actually even the sciences that led to anything that we consider science today. All those people originally like knew astrology, like a
Whoa.
lot of those folks, yeah. And so within the context of learning that, we then, learned a little bit about astrology, and he was like, oh yeah, you can like pull up your natal chart online and do all these things. And I remember the first time I did that, I was totally blown away, because I was reading all these things that felt incredibly pertinent to my character and my experiences from a computer. um and I was, as somebody who loves old systems and understanding how these old philosophical belief systems, cosmologies function, I was just like immediately hooked and wanted to understand, like, how could the position of a planet at the time of my birth say something about who I am. um yeah, that's how it started for me. And then
Wow.
I kept learning more.
That is so fascinating. I didn't know that about astrology being such a root of these other sciences. That is super fascinating. And I mean, I know I've heard you talk about the intersection of healing and astrology and using it kind of in treatment and kind of moving more in that direction.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, it sounds like you're going back to like the roots of medicine in like a Western scientific medicine. Uh, like it sounds like a very timely pursuit, I guess. So, what
Hmm.
have you seen in working with people around their health or their body and astrology? Like, what can astrology tell us about ourselves in that way?
Oh, there's a lot. um there's a
You can
there's
be
a
brief.
there's a lot of things. I think one of the things, what I've focused on more so in readings so far, has been using astrology as a tool to speak about character, personality, and how to navigate people through change in their life. And so, and change, when change happens in our lives, usually there's a lot of things become destabilized, emotionally, physically. A lot of things are in flux, which is often a time where people need guidance and help as they're navigating shift. And so what I've found, so far in my astrological practice, I've counseled people or sat with people and talked with people more about how the astrology is reflecting growth periods, transformational periods that have to do with sort of the evolution of somebody's character and life experiences, which then of course has a huge impact also on mental health specifically. When people understand or somehow have a grasp over um, what the context of the change that they're going through, it makes it much easier to move through change. But also astrology actually also carries language that defines why these changes might be happening and what lessons there are to be learned. And also, this is the great thing, gives you a time frame.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really fun. Because when you're going through shitty times, you want to know when's it gonna be over.
I think a lot of
And
people can relate to that right now.
right, it's just like, all right. So because also the thing is, sometimes we don't realize that, sometimes we're in periods in life, like not everything. Sometimes we can be in certain spaces in life and it feels like that's just the new normal.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not always the case. We do have transformational periods in life that can last 2, 3, 5 years,
Mm.
where our spirit, where our being is working through things. And so yeah, the element of timing is also incredibly helpful when uh, working with folks who are going through transition, because it gives people an understanding of what this transitional process is time wise is going to look like. And of course, the time element also gives you an idea of the amount of labor that's actually involved in the transformational
Mm.
or in the change. Because things that are just like, oh yeah, 3 weeks, is a different thing than like, okay, you're actually
Right.
going through a 3-year growth period that has
Right.
everything to do with blah, 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 blah. So most of my work has been focused on that. And it's only more recently that I'm also really wanting to look into the more physical manifestations of how the planets, how our natal how our natal chart speaks to our body, and the functions of our physical body, which astrology does as well. And so I'm more so now beginning to integrate that other aspect also into my work with folks.
Very cool.
Mm.
That timing piece is so key because I'm sure that you see this as a practitioner. Like you're leading people, you're helping people through a period or through a process, right, of healing.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of the traditional medicines, we're talking about seasons and we're talking about, working with the seasons, but it's a whole other thing and a whole other level of specificity if you're talking about very specific transitions, like on this date at this time this is going to happen and hit your chart in this way. So that sounds incredibly useful when we're talking about these processes of healing. um
Yeah.
and right now, I mean, there's also kind of a, like, everybody is experiencing movement in the stars, right? At the same time, we're
Mm-hmm.
all experiencing it differently because our charts are all different. But I've heard a lot of astrologers talk about big movements, including you doing lectures on Saturn and Jupiter and Pluto, being in Capricorn and all of this stuff. Is there something that you want people to know or can tell us about this big picture of like what's happening right now in the stars and how that might be influencing things? And I think people are trying to ground and make meaning out of this, as we do as humans. And is there something that astrology has for us to help us through this time?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, so much. This has been, this has been wild also for my astrologer community, because you attended a bunch of my workshops last year
Mm-hmm.
that were titled astrology and collective resilience, like finding guidance from the stars in times of change,
Mm-hmm.
or in times of social upheaval. And at that time, I was working with the astrologer, Giselle, putting those from Seattle, putting those workshops together. And we were looking at the astrology of 2020, as many astrologers have done in the last 2 years and longer, but more so in the last 2 years. I'm seeing that the year 2020 is a precipice year. Like, it's a year of it's a year that astrologically spells massive change, um, on many levels, but specifically on a very institutional level, on a level that has the capacity to affect the way that we are all held in place, the systems that hold us in place, the structures that we have built around ourselves and within which we operate, that define our movement, our freedom, um, and our ability to be like function, like to be social beings, um, being under being under the lens, being under change, being under uh, like a composting period, um, where the failures of how we are socializing are going to become apparent. Um, or how we structure society, the failures of how we have structured ourselves, mainly through Capricorn, um, capitalist systems have are that have don't do not have equality as at their center, at their philosophical center. How we will sort of like reap the repercussions of those systems, and how the failures of those systems will become apparent in 2020. And so, none of us, we didn't know it. Obviously, we didn't know. We knew something was happening. We didn't know like this was gonna happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it has been written in the stars that this is a big shift year, and certain themes of that shift have been apparent, and also looking ahead now, looking into the future now, looking for solutions, like what solutions do uh, do the planets also offer us at this time. I was just talking to Giselle actually today about having a follow-up workshop,
Mm-hmm.
where we delve deeper into, well, what solutions are being suggested on the horizon, which I think could be really helpful for folks to sort of envision themselves into. Um, One of the things that seems to be crucial at this time is actually creative envisioning, like 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 we're going through a shift where Saturn has moved into Aquarius, or is beginning its transition into Aquarius, which means that the way that we structure, the way that we socialize ourselves, the way that we build systems around ourselves will be influenced more strongly by Aquarian energies. um, and so thinking about seeing that already as like the flashing sign, because literally as Saturn enters Aquarius, here we are at a global pandemic, and so when at the beginning of a transit like that, we always receive a lot of like we see the signs of, oh, what will this transit spell out for humanity over the next 3 years? What are the themes and the challenges that we will have to confront and creatively solve, as this new time starts? And so it's become very clear in many ways what some of those challenges at this time are, but of course, and and the flavor of the solutions that we have to work towards, you know. Aquarius is the sign of the humanitarian, is the sign of social equality, of like egalitarian being this idea that we can somehow be equalized, that somehow that there's a thread of common understanding amongst us, that there's some kind of unifying thread that we can attach to that brings us together, that we also need to identify what that is, and make that a key concept within our structures and our philosophies moving forward. Aquarius is also a sign of tremendous, is the innovator of the zodiac, and has a lot to do with imagining, understanding that the solutions that we have right now do not serve us, and that we have to actually innovate and create new things, like completely new things that fill the gap of what's not working. So in many ways, our transition into this Aquarian time sort of heralds the necessity for those kinds of thinking patterns. And that Saturn, our structuring element, needs to reflect those in order for us as a society to kind of like move forward. The tricky thing, of course, about Aquarius is that because it is egalitarian, and can have a tendency to create things as being equal to each other. It is actually also it's actually also a sign of fascism, and
like everything being the same, basically.
yeah, like equal, like, yeah, you know, this idea that one's belief systems now need to be imposed that onto others, or that the system by which we're working needs to be imposed on the rest of us, one system for all, you know. So that's kind of like that's the shadow tricky side of Aquarius. But astrologically there's a lot of signs of what this year has to bring.
It sounds like, stay on your toes.
Yeah, it's kind of right now. It feels like we're just so new into some of these shifts. We're also under like a lot of erratic upheaval energy, that it's actually a bit, you know, it's I think there's an element of like, okay, we gotta like see, like assess the situation, you know. In May Saturn will retrograde back into Capricorn, and I think for the middle of the year, like I think we're kind of getting a glimpse of how of the change that's kind of blossoming right now, or I don't know if blossoming is really the right word, but you know. But it's just kind of, you know, unfolding. And I think astrologically, the retrograde of Saturn back into Capricorn, I think will have us sort of it's like we're evaluating what's happening right now, and then we're taking that knowledge back to understand how our structures, our systems need to change in order to move forward. So but it's a huge retrograde year, you know. It's a lot of planets in the middle of the year are going to go retrograde. There's going to be a lot of like reassessing, reworking. I mean, I feel like we're creating we're going to be creating very new concepts for ourselves.
So it sounds like, the resilience piece of that, you know, for collective resilience, what is that to you? Is that self-care? Is that What do you suggest for people to kind of take care of themselves with all this upheaval, and if this is lasting, if this is 2020, it's not just COVID-19 pandemic. It's kind of the transitions are going on into early 2021, right?
Hmm.
So, what, looking at that horizon, what do you think people should focus on as they ride this wave?
I think, I mean, the it's collective resilience. I think everything we're doing right now has the medicine for everything we're doing right now is the word collective.
Mm,
I think as Saturn enters Aquarius, we are going to be thinking systemically. We're going to be thinking about how we are all connected, how the consequences, or how we are all chained, linked together, how we're in this lattice together, and the way that actually functions has already become incredibly clear to us. I mean, literally, like, we have to socially distance because we recognize that we're sharing air,
mm.
um, in a very tangible, which is also an Aquarius is an air sign and the sign of distance. So it's like astrologically pretty quite apt that
Yeah.
we are in the time that we're in right now.
Wow.
Um, um, yeah, wild.
That is
Um,
wild.
yeah, jeez. but
Collectivity.
but
Yeah.
yeah, collectivity. I think we're called towards um understanding more how we affect one another, and I don't mean just like on a global scale, but like literally in our local economies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in many ways what I would think that what would be a satisfying activity would be to engage the impetus to engage the collective and to understand how we can, what part we play, what part we each individually play, and how we can assist collective processes. With all this Aquarian energy happening, um, I just don't. I don't think it's, even though we're socially distancing and we're all at home. I don't actually think that intellectually it's a time for us to just like cave
Mm.
and like enter a cave and disconnect. I think the opposite is actually being called of us, is that we have to like actually creatively figure out how, what our collective is, what our communities are, and how we can take care of our communities and also compromise and sacrifice, um, within our communities. I think this whole, one of the main things that's going to start coming up, I think, in the next couple of days is the rent strike.
Mm.
Already we're like a lot of, we're communicating with our landlords. Some
Mm-hmm.
landlords are incredibly understanding and accommodating and supportive of the fact
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of a lot of people will not be able to pay rent. um, but others aren't. And so there comes also this personal assessment that we are called to do, of like, what resources do we actually have, and how can we, like, what can we give to the collective, like what can we sort of
Mm-hmm.
sacrifice,
Mm-hmm.
like what comforts can we sacrifice for our collective well-being. um you know um so yeah, I honestly, I think, I mean, there's, those are the larger scale things. I mean, I think on a very basic being quarantined level, Aquarius is also a bit the sign of the hermit, and
Mm.
the one that removes themselves to gain higher understanding of things. I think we all have to kind of manage ourselves,
Mm.
within our quarantined spaces a little bit better, like get a better understanding of articulating our everyday needs, of building our everyday routines. um and yeah, I mean, I think I mean, there's multiple levels of self-care. I mean, there's like just like basic, I think, like
Mm-hmm.
stay at home
Washing yourself.
things that we have to do, of like making sure you take a walk every day. I feel
Right.
I feel like that's actually a huge detrimental one right
It's
now.
huge. Yeah, get outside, breathe some air. you know. Yeah, hear the birds chirping, know you're a human.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, thank you so much. That was amazing. You just uploaded an amazing wisdom file right there for us. Thank you so much. Before we see if anyone has questions, how can people get readings from you? How can they know if you have classes coming up, like the follow-up to the collective resilience class or sound baths, or where can we find you?
Yeah, I'm honestly like most active, I guess, on I think on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
And
People can find you
so
there. What's your handle?
it's Chagastar, Chagastar.
Okay. Is that all
Um,
one?
mhm.
Write it down.
Um, so whenever I do, yeah, whatever I do, I usually post there.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, and I mostly like in the stories, but also in the feed. I'll post things that I'm up to. And that's also a good way to reach me for readings. You can DM me there and contact me there and schedule a reading if you would
Mm-hmm.
like.
Do
Hmm.
you have an email if people don't have Instagram?
Yeah, totally. Should I? Do you want me to give it to you here or?
Is it just the Nika dot
Yeah,
e?
e.swai, Naike.e.swai @gmail.com.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much for just downloading the wisdom. Let's see if anybody, looks like Erica's here. Let's see if anybody's on Facebook. Awesome. Any questions? Throw it in the chat. I guess not. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I hope people hit you up because yeah, you're amazing, and we're so glad to have you here in Portland.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for creating a network for all of us to access health resources and build community.
Aw,
Really appreciate that.
great. We'll have to have you back because
Yeah.
yeah, it's just the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Erica. Yeah, definitely. I'm super down. Where we could even do like, weekly astro updates of what's currently going on. What I'm ready for I'm ready for this Zoom action.
We're doing the Zoom now. We're all on the Zoom. Talk about connection. The interwebs.
Hmm.
Oh yeah. All right, Erica's down.
I goes down. Okay. Okay. Nice. Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot to wrap one's head around. You want us to just take it step by step. Astrology is fascinating, and it definitely takes recycling of information and knowledge to kind of start to get an understanding of how these things work and how they can help us.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Hmm.
I think that's fascinating and illuminating that astrology has such deep roots in medical traditions. It makes total sense to me. So it's very cool.
Yeah, I did in Chinese medicine too.
Totally. Yeah, there's a total like medical astrology piece that's very deep and nuanced.
Hmm.
Yeah. Everyone's trying to like, find a way to be precise, right, about our human condition and um seek that knowledge, and it seems like around the world people found that in the stars, which makes sense. It's ubiquitous.
Yeah, also, one of the things about that is that we used to we understood who we are by observing the stars. It's such a different relationship to time that we have now, because we can just like look at a clock, or like we can just like look at
Mm,
our phone and be like, oh, it's 7:35. But the way that we even came to that point was that we understood where we are in the year, where we are in growing seasons, where we are in within the cycles of time, by tracking stars.
mm,
That was the way that we knew what to do when. So it's kind of, it's not a big leap to then also assume that somehow that would then also have something to tell us about who we are as a
mhm,
people, and what our movements through time, like what our evolution as societies may look like. Because literally we tracked our necessities and our movement through the year by watching star cycles,
mm.
which is
Yeah.
how people knew when to plant crops and when they would come, when they would be ready for harvest.
Mhm.
um, or when tides or different climatic conditions would come in. So that's how people predicted and understood, themselves.
Mhm.
And I think it's interesting, because you lose all of that when you don't have to do it, at
Right.
all.
Yeah.
um
Yeah. Yeah, even in the Chinese cosmology, there's like a very precise yearly calendar, and it's like the language around these 10-day periods is like, this is the time when the aphids come. This is the time when a certain flower blooms. This is the time. And it was so precise. And then you knew that corresponding to that were all these other things, right? And when you talk about that, it's so embodied, right? Like, to look at a clock on our phone is a very disembodied way to know time versus to read the stars or read the animals that are coming out of hibernation or whatever. And I can
mhm,
imagine in that time, when you think, oh, when somebody is made in October and they're born in July, they're going to be this kind of person, or
mhm,
like they're going to have these kind of qualities, just like plants that come out in that season. Or yeah,
mhm.
and that all of that has this very embodied, like, intersectional way of being.
Yeah, which could even make sense on like a biological level. Like, think about it. I mean, nowadays we can access food, most food, like a lot of foods, at any time of the year. But
Right,
like
right.
if you like also think about like, oh yeah, what kind of food would have been available like in like October,
Mm-hmm.
and how would that then influence like even the chemicals that are running through our system, the hormones that we produce and the balance of those. I don't know, it's just like, one thing is to always keep in mind is that uh these systems are created and embedded in us over thousands of years. We are the product of
Exactly.
our relationship with these things over thousands of years. um you know
Yeah. Yes.
yeah,
It's deep. It's so deep
it's so fun.
and so beautiful. I love learning about it little by little.
Yeah, same.
Very cool. Well, yeah, I think we're good. Unless you have something else to share with the people. I mean, so much to share, I'm sure. But
I mean, I think I actually would like, I mean, I would like to do a more in-depth look of the year and the astrology of the year, where like
beautiful.
where we go into that a little bit. So I'm talking to my astro partner about doing that. And I'll definitely post about it on my Instagram, because there's a
Awesome.
lot of interesting things coming up. And
Yes.
already the timing of the astrology so far has been intense. I mean, one thing I would like to share is I think embodied astrology, Renee gave a really amazing podcast, recorded a really amazing podcast session for the new moon in Aries,
Mm,
um, it's really long. It's like 2.5 hours long. She
Wow.
just like goes. She just went really deep into the astrology of this year. But
Wow.
if you want to know more about it, it's a really amazing episode.
Is her podcast also called Embodied Astrology?
Yes,
Okay.
it's called Embodied Astrology, and the one that I'm talking about specifically is the horoscopes for the new moon in Aries.
Okay. We'll
Because it
post
was
that.
kind of around that new moon that all this kind of started.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. There was like a series of very intense things.
Hmm.
We'll
Yeah,
post
really
that
interesting one.
podcast.
Hmm.
Awesome. Yeah, and we'll definitely post anything that you are offering. So just let me know.
Okay, thank you. All right, Adriana.
All right, Nika. So good to see you. Have a
Yeah,
good
you
rest of your
too.
evening.
Yeah, you too.
We'll see you soon.
All right, bye bye.
Bye.